Gendering work. Early human societies, which were egalitarian, men hunted fishes and provided necessary raw materials for food and made necessary tools for these tasks. Women cared for the house, prepared food, clothing, and looked after children. Women gendering work. The growing significance of production changed the nature of the communistic society. With accumulation of wealth, the relationship between men and women changed. For all wealth was a result of production which is a male activity. Production was more valued than household and the household labor. According to traditional economic theories, life is divided into economic realm and the household realm. Life in the economic and the household. The economic realm focuses on buyer-seller markets, whereas the household realm positions itself on the range of unpaid work that is necessary for the functioning of life. Items that are sold in the market are not only counted as production, and hence household realm was outside the purview of the economic realm. In economics, work in any activity or expenditure of energy that produces services and products of the value to other people. Although work can be performed with wages, salaries, or income, economically speaking, labor market work is strictly performed for pay. These terms are then tied to the term production. Work is productive if and only if its profits are produced. The capitalist system regarded women merely as a convenient source of cheap labor and part of the reserve army of labor to be drawn on when there is a shortage of labor in certain areas of production and discarded again when the need disappears. We saw this in the both world wars when women were drafted initially into the factories to replace men who had been called up into the army and then sent back to the home when the war ended. Women were again encouraged to enter the workplaces during the period of capitalist upswing of the 1950s and the 1960s, when their role was analogous to that of the immigrant worker as a reservoir of the cheap labor. This pattern of unpaid work tends to exist even when women are engaged in outside work for an income, whether as a wage worker or self employed workers. Women from poor families who are engaged in outside work as well as usually cannot afford. This pattern of unpaid work tends to exist even when women are engaged outside work for income. These processes are also integral to capitalism and have become even more marked in recent years. The assumption of traditional economics that had devastating consequences on the woman. Feminist economics grew in response to the restricted and the inadequate view of the economy offered by the mainstream economic thinking. In this context, one of the key challenges for feminist economics was to make visible the so called invisible or the unpaid economy. Visible or unpaid economy. Productive and reproductive work. The tendency of highlighting the unpaid economic work has a long standing history within the debates on the gender and development. Danish economics Esther Bostrup, in her work Women's Role in Economic Development, has highlighted women's importance to the agriculture economy. Sub-Saharan Africa, and in particular, was singled out as the great global area of female farming system in which women using traditional hoe technology assumed a substantial responsibility for food production. Moreover, Bostrom posited a positive correlation between the role women played in agriculture production and their status with men. Instead of needy beneficiaries, the work represented women as productive members of society. One of the most pervasive themes for the present feminist movement is the emphasis placed on the role of reproduction. Women do globes unpaid second and the third shift work of household tasks. Unpaid work includes house work such as preparing meals for the family, cleaning the house, and gathering water and fuel, as well as work caring for children, older people, and family members who are sick over both the short and long term. Women in India do almost 10 times the amount of unpaid care work that men do. Three quarters of unpaid work is routine household chore exacerbated by poor access to basic services. Excar by poor basis to basic services such as sanitation, clean water, and clean sources of cooking fuel in China and Bangladesh to consider two other Asian countries for comparative purposes. Women do about 3 and 4 times the amount of unpaid work unpaid care work as men. Human Development Report states that women are estimated to contribute 52% of global work, men 48%. But when if women carry more than half the burden, they are disadvantaged in both realms of work, paid as well as unpaid work, in patterns that reinforces each other. In 2015, the global labor force participation rate was 50% for women but 77% for men. Female participation in the labor force and employment rates are affected heavily by the economic, social, and the cultural tissues and care work distribution in the home. Of the 59% of work that is paid mostly outside the home, men's share is nearly twice that of women. 38% versus 21%. The picture is reversed for unpaid work, mostly within the home and encompassing a range of care responsibilities of the 41% of work that is unpaid. Women perform 3 times more than men. Hence, the imbalance men dominate the world of paid work, women that of unpaid work. Unpaid work in the home is indispensable to the functioning of the society and human well-being. Yet, when it falls primarily to women, it limits their choices and opportunities for other activities that could be more fulfilling to them. Even when women are in paid work, they face disadvantages and discrimination. The evidence of the glass ceiling is just one of them. Women, which is a glass ceiling, women are underrepresented in senior business management globally. They hold only 22% of senior leadership positions, and 32% of business do not have any female senior managers. While regional variations, occupational segregation has been pervasive over time and across levels of the economic prosperity in both advanced and developing countries. Men are overrepresented in crafts, traders, plant and machine operation, and managerial and the legislative. Occupation and women in mid-skill occupations such as clerks, service workers, and shop and sale workers. Even when doing similar work, women can earn less with the wage gaps generally greater for the highest paid professionals. Globally, women earn 24% less than men due to their disproportionate share of care work. Women have less time than men for other activities, including paid work and education. In low human development countries, men spend nearly 30% more time on social life and leisure than women. In very high human development countries, the difference is 12%. Despite the importance for human development, care work often goes unrecognized among all countries attempting to measure the value of unpaid care work. Estimates range from 20% to 60 of GDP. In India, unpaid care is estimated at 39. In South Africa, 15. When women have no choice but to give priority to unpaid work and stay out of the labor force, they make large sacrifices, perhaps missing the chance to expand their capabilities in the workplace. They also lose opportunities for the economic independence. In order to understand dynamics of gender and work, the nature of sex discrimination, wages participate in the development process, and implication for political action. Analysts must examine the two areas of production and reproduction as well as the interaction between them. A variety of recent studies on women in the third world countries have focused on the interaction between production and the reproduction to analyze women's work. Maria Mee's study of the Indian women lace makers in the Narsapur, Andhra Pradesh, for example, shows how the seclusion of women has conditioned their participation in non household production. Although lace making is producing industry geared toward the international market, it is highly compatible with the seclusion and domestic work. Women are engaged in the lace making as much as 6 to 8 hours a day in addition to the household chore. Their average daily earnings amount to less than a third of the official minimum wage for female agricultural laborers. This situation persists even though the industry has grown considerably since 1970 and represents a very high proportion of the foreign exchange earnings from the handicrafts and in the region. Many of the women are the actual breadwinners in their families. Might argue that this highly exploitative system, in fact, led to greater class differentiation within local communities as well as greater polarization between the sexes. The system is made possible by the ideology of the seclusion that rigidly confines women to the home, eliminates their opportunity for outside work, and makes them willing to accept extremely low wages. For lace makers, caste and gender work to transform beliefs about women's unequal status and power in a private sphere into hierarchical ordering in which women's work in production of lace is conceptualized as a leisure activity with different pay, and where reproducts and the proceeds of this industry are controlled by the men. Expansion of the lace industry into the global market led not only to the class differentiated within the particular communities but also to the masculinization of the all non-production jobs. Paid care work globally and estimated 53 million people ages 15 and older are in paid domestic work. Of these, 83 are the women, some migrant workers, and as a global care work chain has emerged, where migrant domestic workers undertake household work and provide care to children and others in the households abroad, but often leave their own children and parents behind in their homeland, creating care gap often filled by grandparents, other relatives, or hired local helpers. Standards of measurement of work. Attempts were made to include subsistence production in the national accounts of some countries in the 1950s and 60s, but it was pushed by the women's movement in the 1970s, which really focused on the importance of non market production. Esther Bostrup's foundational 1970 work, Women's Role in Economic Development, clearly show the key role of subsistence production in the third world economies and the pivotal role of women in those economies. Yet her case for counting many of these women's activities was that they were part of subsistence production, not that women's household labor was productive. However, this later argument was taken up by the feminist movement, and Hochuli foundational work in early 1970s was followed by a series of studies which clearly saw housework as work as productive and is done mainly by the woman. According to UN's System of the National Accounts of 1993, which provides the conceptual framework that sets the international statistical standard for the measurement and classification of economic activities. Some unpaid work activities are deemed economic work, and much like paid work, are considered to belong with the SNA production boundary. Other unpaid work activities are classified as non economic. Newly created employment opportunity can serve as a vehicle for transforming women's life by reducing the unpaid work burden and thus altering the paid and unpaid gender division of labor. In some cases, this will translate to prioritizing public investment in the infrastructure that reduces unpaid work such as rural water projects, feeder roads, etc. The importance of employment guarantee programs in our context is that if well designed, they can reduce unpaid work while redistributing the cost of reproduction by creating jobs for both women and men instead of reinforcing the existing gender-based division of unpaid labor. If such projects are not gender-informed, the danger is that they may create a typical double effect for women. Gender equality is a pressing human issue, but also have huge ramifications for jobs, productivity, GDP growth, and inequality. The economic potential of India's women is not achievable without gender gaps in society being addressed. India has a lower share of women's contribution to GDP than the global average of 37% and the lowest among all regions in the world. India's economy would have the highest relative boost among all regions of the world if its women participated in paid work in the market economy on a similar basis to men, erasing the current gaps in labor force. Similarly to men, erasing the barriers hindering women from participating in the labor on par with the men are unlikely to be fully addressed within that time the frame and because ultimately such participation is a matter of personal choice. The role of women in the workplace cannot be viewed in isolation from the role in society. Achieving the economic potential of women requires gender gaps in both work and in society to be narrowed. Equality in one goes hand in hand with equality in the other. Data from India's National Sample Service Office's surveys indicates that women's labor force participation is significantly lower than that of men in both urban and rural. Based on data for the population aged 15 and over, India's female labor force rate is just 21% in urban areas and 36 in rural compared with the 76 and 81 in the case of men. About 70% of the female employment is in rural areas. In the unorganized sector, men are more likely to be employers. Women are more likely to be the wage workers or unpaid family workers. Men are more likely to own large enterprises. The Global Gender Gap Report 2015 reveals a widespread perception that women are paid lower wages compared with men for the same work. Analyzing 68th round national sample surveys, wage data by occupation for India appears to support this trend. Women get paid 30% less than their male counterparts. MC Kinsey Global Institute identified gender gap in leadership among Indian women. Only 7% of tertiary educated women have jobs as senior officials compared with 14% of men. Similarly, women account for only 38 of all professional technical jobs. Women constitute just 5 of the boards of companies in India. This means that at the 9,000 listed firms in the country, there are only 400 board members. These figures may not present a complete picture as 200 of them belongs to family-owned firms. So the number of women who have actually climbed the ladder is just a sad fraction. In 2014, Securities and Exchange Board of India (SEBI) had directed the companies listed on the National Stock Exchange to appoint at least one woman director on their boards by the month of the October in the same year. The presence of a compulsory female member on the board would ensure the implementation of more women-oriented policies. However, more than the 200 companies have failed to comply with the directive as of April 2015, resulting in imposition of fines. This shows the general attitude towards the potential of women work. Underlying social attitudes about the role of women are the arguably some of the biggest barriers Indian women face. Found a strong link between the attitudes that limit women's potential and actual gender equality outcomes in a given region. For instance, the survey asked respondents, both men and women, whether they agreed with the following statement: when jobs are scarce, men should have more right to a job than women, and when a mother works for the pay the children suffer. It examined the responses against outcomes related to work equality and found strong correlations with the both. Half or more of the respondents in India agreed with the both statement, and India has some of the world's lowest rates of women labor force participation. Workplace or occupational violence in the form of threats and the physical or the verbal and the non-verbal abuse is also a concern for many workers. Sexual harassment can be perpetrated by and directed at a range of people, including employers, contractors, and clients. It can be subtle or overt and could be deliberate or unintended. Overt. The type of harassment vary from the abuse of authority or position to relation among co-workers and affiliated personnel to inappropriate behavior toward consultants. Other particular vulnerable population of women include those working in education and the training institution, domestic workers, migrant workers, workers with little job security, and workers in occupations where a large number of women are supervised by small numbers of men. Human trafficking is other form of violence against women and girls, which is the most lucrative illicit business worldwide. Between 207 to 210 victims, 136 nationalities were detected in 118 countries. Some 55 to 60 a percent of the victims were women. Most were trafficked for the sexual exploitation of or working as a forced labor. Exploitation is common in paid domestic work, particularly for the female migrant workers in developing countries. In people's home, exploitation often remain outside the scope of labor law. Up to 18 hours a day without days off, limiting their movements. Domestic workers may also be subject to physical or sexual abuse. Even so, many domestic workers feel obliged to remain with the abusive employers because they need to work to support their own families, seizing every opportunity, seizing every situation. Some of the issues faced by the women in the employment. Poverty and limited education push women into labor markets at an early age, but the sheer economic reason of getting better incomes pushes them out of the other labor markets and into sex work. This was revealed by a path breaking pan India survey of sex workers conducting in 2009. When men move for work, it is taken for granted that their wives would follow them even at the cost of disrupting their own careers. Defying this age old norm is a small but increasing number of women. From the field of journalism, we hear that some prominent women journalists have made their way into higher echelons of new television, where most women in the field face the glass ceiling and remain content with the modest while performing drudge work. For many construction workers in the metro cities, there is a choice between starvation in the village and exploitation in healthy environment in the cities. There is no social protection for workers in the informal sector. About a quarter of total workforce in Indian BPO sector comprise women and they confined to lower echelons of this USD 40 billion industry, but the real life of women details severe health issues due to constantly tiring eye muscles, depression, digestive tissues, and moreover the fear of darkness due to odd work timing. In present scenario, deep-rooted social norms and practices underpinning gender inequalities leave the women and the girls with the limited choices and opportunities. To overcome the situation, there is need to close gender gaps in secondary and tertiary education in India's large states, lower barriers to job creation, expand skills training for women in key sectors, expand the reach of financial and digital services to enable women entrepreneurs, set up gender diversity policies and practices in organizations, strengthen legal provisions for the women and the enforcement of the laws, improve infrastructure and services to address the high burden of routine domestic work. Childcare and elder care reshape deep rooted attitudes about the role of women in work and in society. Many societies are experiencing a generational shift, particularly in the educated middle class households towards greater sharing of care work between men and women. Much remains to be done and action needs to be happen quickly to address deep gender inequalities in the realm of work.